Every year, on the same cold and gray morning, Richard Langston visited the cemetery where his son lay buried. The air was always heavy with sadness, not just because of the weather, but because of the weight he carried inside him. Richard wasn't, like most people who came to mourn. He didn't bring flowers or leave heartfelt notes. Instead, he simply sat there, staring at the headstone that bore his son's name, Ethan Langston, and wrestled with the guilt that had haunted him for 5 long years. Richard was a man who seemed to have everything. He owned skyscrapers, yachts, and more money than he could ever spend in a lifetime. But none of it mattered now. His wealth couldn't undo what had happened. Ethan, his only child, had died in a car accident when he was just 19. It was an event that shattered Richard's world completely. He blamed himself every day. If only he hadn't argued with Ethan that night. If only he'd been a better father. If only. The cemetery was quiet except for the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. Richard knelt down beside the grave, running, his fingers over the engraved letters of Ethan's name. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of emotion. "I should have done better by you." Tears welled up in his eyes, but he blinked them away quickly. Crying wouldn't bring Ethan back. Nothing would. As Richard stayed there, lost in thought, something unusual caught his attention. A faint noise coming from behind a nearby tree. At first, he dismissed it as the wind or maybe a bird flapping its wings. But then he saw movement. A figure emerged cautiously, stepping out from the shadows. It was a girl, no older than Ethan would have been if he were still alive. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her hair tangled and her face smudged with dirt. She looked like she hadn't eaten properly in days. Clutched tightly against her chest was a small bundle wrapped in a tattered cloth. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Richard stared at her, unsure of what to say or do. This place was supposed to be private, a sanctuary for him to grieve without interruption. Who was this girl, and why was she here? Despite his confusion, there was something about her presence that made him pause. There was a vulnerability in her eyes, a depth of pain that mirrored his own. Finally, the girl took a hesitant step forward. She stopped a few feet away, glancing nervously between Richard and the grave. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no words came out. Richard cleared his throat, trying to steady his voice. "Are you lost?" he asked gently, though his tone carried a hint of suspicion. She shook her head slowly, her gaze fixed on the headstone. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. Her voice was soft, barely audible over the breeze. "I know him," she said, pointing to Ethan's name carved into the stone. Richard froze. His heart skipped a beat, then began racing. What did she mean? How could this girl possibly know Ethan? Dozens of questions flooded his mind, but before he could ask any of them, she continued. "He helped me once," she added, her voice trembling slightly, "when no one else would." A wave of emotions washed over Richard. Shock, curiosity, and even a flicker of hope. For so long he had felt disconnected from Ethan's life. He had struggled to understand who his son really was outside of their strained relationship, and now here was someone claiming to have known him, to have been touched by his kindness. Could it be true? "Tell me more," Richard urged, taking a step closer. But the girl hesitated, biting her lip as if debating whether to trust him. Sensing her unease, Richard softened his tone. "Please," he said. "Anything you can tell me. I need to hear it." The girl glanced around, perhaps checking to see if anyone else was nearby. When she finally looked back at Richard, there was a mix of fear and determination in her expression. "Not here," she murmured. "Can we go somewhere else?" Richard nodded immediately. Without thinking twice, he gestured toward his car parked a short distance away. "Come with me," he said. "We'll talk somewhere warm." To his surprise, the girl agreed. As they walked side by side, Richard couldn't help but notice how frail she seemed. Every step she took was cautious, as if she expected danger to strike at any moment. Despite her condition, there was a resilience in her posture, a quiet strength that reminded him of Ethan. Once they reached the car, Richard opened the passenger door for her. She hesitated briefly before climbing in, clutching her bundle even tighter. As he started the engine, Richard glanced at her again. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Lily," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Well, Lily," Richard said, forcing a smile despite the storm brewing inside. Thank you for trusting me. Whatever you have to say, I promise I'll listen." With that, they drove off, leaving the cemetery behind. Little did Richard know, this encounter would change his life forever. The girl named Lily held secrets, not just about Ethan, but about things Richard never imagined. Secrets that would force him to confront his past, redefine his future, and perhaps find a way to heal the wounds he thought would never close. The drive to the diner was quiet, filled only with the hum of the car engine and the occasional rustle of leaves outside. Richard kept glancing at Lily from the corner of his eye, trying to piece together what kind of connection she could have had with Ethan. She sat stiffly in the passenger seat, clutching her bundle tightly against her chest, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. Her silence was unnerving, but Richard didn't push her. Whatever she had to say, he knew it wouldn't come easily. When they arrived at a small diner tucked away on the outskirts of town, Richard parked the car and turned to face her. "Are you hungry?" he asked gently. Lily hesitated for a moment, before nodding slowly. It was clear she hadn't eaten properly in days. Her thin frame and hollow cheeks told that story all too well. Richard felt a pang of guilt just looking at her. How long had she been living like this? And how had Ethan crossed paths with her? Inside the diner, the atmosphere was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the coldness of the cemetery they'd left behind. The smell of coffee and freshly baked pancakes wafted through the air, making Richard's stomach growl despite the heaviness in his heart. They chose a booth near the window, where sunlight streamed in through the glass, casting golden patterns on the table. A waitress approached, cheerful and chatty, but Lily shrank back slightly, as if unaccustomed to human interaction. Richard ordered for both of them: pancakes, eggs, toast, and orange juice. He wanted to make sure she ate enough. As they waited for their food, Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Lily," he began cautiously, "you said Ethan helped you once. Can you tell me more about that?" She fidgeted, with the edge of the napkin in front of her, clearly uncomfortable. For a moment, Richard thought she might refuse to answer. But then she took a deep breath and started speaking, her voice soft but steady. "It was a few months before the accident," she said, pausing briefly as if the memory pained her. "I was staying under a bridge downtown. It was raining hard that night and I didn't know where else to go. I was scared." Richard listened intently, his heart aching as she spoke. He couldn't imagine what it must have been like for her, alone, cold, and afraid. "Ethan found me there," she continued. "He didn't act like most people do when they see someone like me. He didn't look away or pretend I wasn't there. He stopped and asked if I was okay. When I told him I didn't have anywhere to go, he gave me his jacket and sat with me for hours. We talked about everything, our families, our dreams, our fears." Her words painted a picture of Ethan that Richard barely recognized. The son he had known had always seemed distant, closed off, unwilling to share much of himself. Yet here was this girl, describing a side of him that was compassionate, thoughtful, and deeply empathetic. It made Richard feel both proud and ashamed. Proud because his son had been capable of such kindness, and ashamed because he realized how little he truly understood about him. "He came back after that," Lily added, her voice growing stronger. "Not every day, but whenever he could. He brought me food sometimes, or books. He loved reading, you know. He said books were like windows to other worlds." She smiled faintly at the memory, but it quickly faded. "One time he told me about his plan to help kids like me. He wanted to start something big, something that would give us a second chance. He even arranged for me to meet with a counselor, but..." Her voice trailed off and she looked down at her hands. "But what?" Richard prompted gently. though he already suspected the answer. Before we could take the next step, the accident happened, she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. After that, I never saw him again. The food arrived just then, steaming hot and fragrant, but neither of them touched it right away. Richard felt as though someone had punched him in the gut. All this time he had thought Ethan was drifting, further away from him, becoming someone he didn't recognize. But the truth was far more painful. Ethan had been growing into a remarkable young man, one who cared deeply about others and dreamed of making a difference in the world. And Richard hadn't been there to support him. "You must think I'm crazy," Lily said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Coming up to you like that at the cemetery. I don't even know you, and here I am telling you all this stuff." "No," Richard replied firmly, shaking his head. "I'm glad you did. I need to hear these things about Ethan. He was my son, but sometimes it feels like I didn't really know him at all." Lily nodded, seeming to accept his words. Slowly, she picked up her fork and began eating, savoring each bite, as if it were the first real meal she'd had in weeks. Watching her, Richard felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness for the life she'd endured, gratitude for the glimpse she'd given him into Ethan's world, and a growing sense of responsibility. He couldn't undo the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could do something to honor his son's legacy. "What happened to your family?" Richard asked after a while, careful to keep his tone gentle. "Do you have anyone looking out for you?" Lily hesitated, chewing slowly before answering. "My mom died when I was little," she said quietly. "My dad, he wasn't around much. When he left, I ended up in foster care, but it wasn't a good fit. I ran away when I was 14. Since then, it's just been me." Richard's heart ached hearing this. At 14, Ethan had still been living at home, arguing with him over curfews and schoolwork. Meanwhile, Lily had been fighting to survive on the streets completely alone. The unfairness of it all hit him like a punch to the chest. He wanted to ask more questions, to understand every detail of her story, but he could see that she was tired. Tired of running. Tired of hiding. Tired of being invisible. "I want to help you," Richard said finally, his voice filled with determination. "Whatever you need, I'll make sure you're safe." Lily looked at him skeptically, as if unsure whether to believe him. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "You don't even know me." "Because Ethan would have wanted me to," Richard replied without hesitation. "And because everyone deserves a second chance." For the first time since they'd met, a flicker of hope appeared in Lily's eyes. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. As they finished their meal and prepared to leave the diner, Richard felt a renewed sense of purpose. He didn't know exactly how he would help her yet, but he knew one thing for certain. Meeting Lily wasn't an accident. She was a part of Ethan's story, and now, somehow, she was becoming a part of his. Over the next few days, Richard found himself thinking about Lily constantly. Her story lingered in his mind like an unfinished melody, haunting him with its raw honesty and the glimpses it offered into Ethan's life. He couldn't shake the image of her sitting across from him at the diner, her cautious demeanor, her quiet strength, and the way she spoke about his son as if he were still alive. It was clear that Ethan had left a lasting impression on her, but there was something more to it, something she wasn't saying. Richard could feel it in the way she hesitated sometimes, choosing her words carefully as though guarding a secret. He decided to visit her again, this time bringing supplies instead of questions. Armed with bags of fresh clothes, toiletries, and non-perishable food, Richard drove to the abandoned warehouse district where Lily had told him she often stayed. The area was desolate, filled with crumbling buildings and graffiti-covered walls. It was no place for anyone, let alone a young girl trying to survive on her own. As he parked his car and stepped out, the cold wind bit at his skin, reminding him how unforgiving the world could be. It didn't take long to find her. She was huddled near the entrance of one of the warehouses, wrapped in the same tattered blanket she'd been carrying the day they met. When she saw Richard approaching, her eyes widened in surprise. "What are you doing here?" she asked, standing up quickly. There was a hint of defensiveness in her tone, as if she expected him to scold her or demand answers. "I brought you some things," Richard replied, holding up the bags. "Clothes, food, whatever you might need." Lily stared at him for a moment, then reluctantly took the bags. "You didn't have to do this," she muttered, avoiding his gaze. "Yes, I did," Richard said firmly. "Ethan would have wanted me to." At the mention of Ethan's name, Lily's expression softened. She set the bags down and sat back, against the wall, wrapping the blanket tighter around herself. "Why are you really here?" she asked after a pause. "You don't owe me anything." Richard sighed and lowered himself onto the ground beside her. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "Maybe I just miss him. Talking to you makes me feel closer to him, like I'm learning things about him I never knew before." Lily nodded, slowly, her fingers tracing patterns on the concrete floor. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "He talked about you sometimes, you know." Richard's heart skipped a beat. "What did he say?" She hesitated, as if weighing whether to share what she knew. Finally, she said, "He said you worked hard, that you built everything from scratch. He admired that about you, but he also said he wished you'd listen more." The words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He had always prided himself on being a provider, on giving Ethan everything he needed to succeed. Yet somehow he had failed to give him the one thing that mattered most: understanding. "I should have listened," Richard murmured, his voice heavy with regret. "If I had, maybe things would have been different." Lily didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached into her backpack and pulled out a worn notebook. Its cover was faded and the edges were frayed, but it was clear that it meant something to her. She held it tightly for a moment, then handed it to Richard. "This belongs to you," she said simply. Confused, Richard took the notebook and opened it. The first page bore Ethan's name written in neat block letters. His chest tightened as he flipped through the pages, discovering sketches, poems, and journal entries, all in Ethan's handwriting. Some pages were filled with doodles of cityscapes and abstract designs, while others contained fragments of poetry that revealed his innermost thoughts. One entry stood out in particular. "Dad doesn't get it. He thinks success is measured by money. But I want to leave a mark that matters. I want to help people who feel invisible, like they don't matter. Maybe someday I'll start a foundation or something, a place where kids like Lily can find hope again." Tears blurred Richard's vision as he read the words. For so long he had believed Ethan resented him, that their strained relationship was irreparable. But now, seeing these pages, he realized his son hadn't given up on him entirely. Ethan had dreams, big, ambitious dreams, and he had hoped Richard would understand and support them. "You kept this?" Richard asked, looking at Lily with newfound respect. She shrugged, though her cheeks flushed slightly. "He gave it to me once, said I could borrow it whenever I needed inspiration. I guess I forgot to give it back." Richard closed the notebook and held it close to his chest. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "This means more to me than you'll ever know." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of Ethan's memory hanging between them. Eventually, Lily broke the quiet. "Do you think people can change?" she asked suddenly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "What do you mean?" Richard replied, turning to look at her. "I mean, do you think someone like me can ever have a normal life again? Or am I stuck like this forever?" Her question caught Richard off guard. He studied her face, noting the fear and longing etched into her features. For years, he had lived by the belief that success was earned through hard work and determination. But sitting here with Lily, he realized that wasn't the whole truth. Sometimes people needed more than grit. They needed a chance, a helping hand to pull them out of the darkness. "Yes," Richard said finally, his voice firm. "I believe people can change, and I'm going to make sure you get that chance." Lily looked at him skeptically, but there was a flicker of hope in her eyes, a spark that hadn't been there before. "How?" she asked. Richard smiled faintly. "By finishing what Ethan started. Over the following weeks, Richard threw himself into planning. He pored over Ethan's notebook, studying his ideas and imagining how they could be brought to life. The foundation Ethan had dreamed of became Richard's mission. He hired architects to design a state-of-the-art facility, recruited counselors and social workers, and partnered with local organizations to create programs for homeless youth. Every decision he made was guided by one simple question. What would Ethan have wanted? Throughout the process, Lily remained a constant presence in his life. She moved into a temporary shelter Richard arranged for her, where she began receiving counseling and medical care. Slowly but surely, she started coming out of her shell. She shared more stories about Ethan, each one painting a fuller picture of the compassionate young man he had been. She even helped Richard choose the name for the foundation, Ethan's Haven. One evening, as they sat together in Richard's office reviewing blueprints for the new building, Lily turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think Ethan would be proud of us?" she asked. Richard paused, considering the question. Then, with a small smile, he replied, "I think he'd say we're just getting started." They continued working side by side. Richard felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. Helping Lily and honoring Ethan's legacy gave him a reason to keep moving forward. But deep down, he suspected there was still more to Lily's story, more secrets she hadn't yet revealed. Whatever they were, he knew they would come to light in time. For now, he focused on building a future that Ethan would have been proud of, one step at a time. As the months passed, Ethan's Haven began to take shape. What started as a vague idea scribbled in Ethan's worn notebook was now becoming a reality, a sprawling facility nestled on the outskirts of the city. The building itself was designed to be warm and welcoming, with large windows that let in natural light and open spaces meant to foster connection and healing. Inside, there were dormitories for teens, classrooms equipped with modern technology, counseling offices, art studios, and even a small library stocked with books Ethan had loved. Every detail reflected Richard's determination to honor his son's vision. Lily played an integral role in the project, acting as both a consultant and an ambassador of sorts. She visited the construction site regularly, offering input on everything, from the layout of the common areas to the colors used in the interior design. Her insights were invaluable. She understood what homeless youth needed because she had lived it herself. When Richard asked her why certain features mattered so much, she simply said, "It's about making people feel like they belong, like this place is theirs." Despite her growing involvement, Lily remained guarded in other ways. She rarely spoke about her past beyond what she'd already shared, and there were moments when Richard sensed she was holding something back. Still, he didn't press her. He knew trust took time, especially for someone who had spent years surviving on their own. Instead, he focused on supporting her in smaller ways, checking in on her at the shelter, bringing her favorite snacks during meetings, or just sitting quietly with her when she seemed lost in thought. One afternoon, as they walked through the nearly completed building, Lily stopped suddenly in front of a mural being painted on one of the walls. It depicted a tree with sprawling branches, each leaf bearing the name of someone who had contributed to the foundation. At the base of the tree was a plaque engraved with Ethan's name. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes as she traced the letters with her fingertips. "He would have loved this," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Richard nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. "He's here, you know," he said softly. "In every room, every corner. This whole place is him." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of Ethan's absence hung heavy between them, but it was no longer suffocating. Instead, it felt like a bridge connecting them, two people united by grief, gratitude, and a shared commitment to keep his memory alive. A few weeks later, Richard received a call from the counselor working with Lily. "She's made incredible progress," the counselor told him over the phone, "but there's still something unresolved. She hasn't opened up completely about her family yet." Richard frowned, his mind racing. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed only deepened his concern. That evening, he invited Lily, to dinner at a quiet cafe downtown. The atmosphere was cozy with soft lighting and the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee. As they sat across from each other, Richard decided it was time to ask the question that had been lingering in his mind for months. "Lily," he began gently, "there's something I need to know. Something you haven't told me yet." Her fork paused midair and she glanced up at him warily. "What do you mean?" "I think you're keeping something from me," he said. "Something important. I'm not trying to pry, but if we're going to move forward, to really make this foundation work, I need to understand everything." Lily stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, without a word, she reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. She slid it across the table toward him, her hands trembling slightly. "You should read this," she said, her voice barely audible. Richard hesitated, then picked up the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a DNA test result. His eyes scanned the document quickly, but it wasn't until he saw the names listed that his heart stopped. One column read Ethan Langston, the other read Lily Harper. And beneath them in bold letters were the words, 99.9% probability of sibling relationship. The room seemed to spin as the implications hit him like a freight train. Lily was Ethan's sister, his daughter. The realization left him breathless, unable to process what he was seeing. This can't be right," he stammered, though deep down he knew it was. "It is," Lily said quietly, tears streaming down her face. "I found out after Ethan died. He was the one who figured it out. He tracked down my birth records and discovered we had the same father, you." Richard slumped back in his chair, the world around him blurring. Memories flooded his mind, flashes of a brief relationship he'd had in college, a woman named Sarah Harper, whom he'd lost touch with shortly after graduation. He had never known she was pregnant. If he had, he would have taken responsibility. Wouldn't he? "I didn't want to tell you," Lily continued, her voice breaking. "Not like this. I was scared you'd hate me, or worse, that you wouldn't, believe me." "Hate you?" Richard echoed, shaking his head vehemently. "No, Lily. Never." He reached across the table and took her hand, his own trembling. "You're my daughter, my child. I may not have known about you before, but I'm here now. We'll figure this out together." Lily looked at him, her tear-filled eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. Finding none, she finally allowed herself to cry freely, releasing years of pent-up pain and fear. Richard moved to sit beside her, pulling her into a tight embrace. For the first time in her life, she felt safe, not just physically, but emotionally. She wasn't alone anymore. In the days that followed, Richard immersed himself in uncovering the truth about Lily's early years. He hired investigators to track down Sarah Harper, hoping to piece together the missing fragments of their story. Meanwhile, he worked tirelessly to ensure that Ethan's haven would become everything Ethan, and now Lily, had envisioned. The grand opening was scheduled for the following month, and invitations had been sent out to local leaders, donors, and media outlets. On the morning of the event, Lily stood nervously in front of a mirror, adjusting the dress Richard had bought for her. It was simple, but elegant, a far cry from the tattered clothes she had worn when they first met. As she stared at her reflection, she barely recognized the person looking back at her. Gone was the frightened girl who had hidden under bridges and avoided eye contact. In her place was someone stronger, braver, and full of hope. When she joined Richard outside the venue, he smiled warmly at her. "Ready?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, linking her arm with his. Together they walked inside, greeted by applause and cheers from the crowd. As Richard delivered his speech, thanking everyone for their support, he turned to Lily and gestured for her to join him on stage. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, her heart pounding. "This foundation isn't just about honoring Ethan," Richard said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's also about giving people like my daughter Lily a second chance. Because everyone deserves to be seen, to be heard, and to know they matter." The audience erupted into applause, but all Lily could focus on was the man standing beside her, the father she had never known, but who had somehow always been there waiting to find her. The grand opening of Ethan's Haven was a whirlwind of emotions, joy, pride, and an overwhelming sense of purpose. The event brought together people from all walks of life, community leaders, philanthropists, volunteers, and even some of the teens who would soon call the facility home. As Richard stood on stage with Lily by his side, he felt a profound shift within himself. For years he had carried the weight of regret, believing he had failed Ethan in every possible way. But now, as he looked out at the crowd and then at Lily, he realized that redemption wasn't about undoing the past. It was about creating something meaningful from it. After the speeches ended and the ribbon-cutting ceremony concluded, guests were invited to tour the building. Lily walked alongside Richard, answering questions and sharing stories about how Ethan had inspired her. Her confidence grew with each interaction, and Richard couldn't help but marvel at the transformation. She no longer seemed like the fragile girl he had first met under the tree near Ethan's grave. Instead, she radiated strength and determination, a living testament to the resilience of the human spirit. As they moved through the art studio, one of the counselors handed Lily a paintbrush. "Why don't you leave your mark?" she suggested, gesturing toward a blank canvas set up for visitors to contribute to. At first, Lily hesitated, unsure of what to create, but then she dipped the brush into a vibrant shade of blue and began painting. Slowly, a tree emerged, its branches reaching skyward, its roots firmly planted in the ground. Beneath it, she wrote two names, Ethan and Lily. When she stepped back, Richard placed a hand on her shoulder. "That's beautiful," he said softly. "It's perfect. It's us," Lily replied, her voice tinged with both sadness and hope. "We're connected no matter what." In the weeks following the opening, Richard dedicated himself to learning more about Lily's early years. With the help of private investigators, he tracked down Sarah Harper, Lily's mother. It turned out that Sarah had struggled with addiction after giving birth to Lily and had eventually lost custody of her daughter. Though Sarah had tried to turn her life around, she passed away several years ago, leaving behind unanswered questions and unresolved pain. When Richard shared this information with Lily, she listened quietly, her expression unreadable. "I wish I could have known her," she said finally. "But I'm glad she tried. That counts for something, right?" Richard nodded, pulling her into a hug. "She loved you enough to give you life, Lily. And now, we have the chance to honor her memory by making sure you thrive." With Sarah's story pieced together, Richard and Lily focused on building their own relationship. They spent evenings talking over dinner, sharing bits of their lives that neither had dared to reveal before. Richard told Lily about the struggles of growing up poor and how he had worked tirelessly to build his empire. In return, Lily opened up about her time on the streets, the fear, the loneliness, and the moments of unexpected kindness that had kept her going. One night, as they sat on the couch watching old movies, Lily turned to him with a curious smile. "Do you think Ethan planned this?" she asked. "Like, do you think he somehow knew we'd find each other?" Richard chuckled softly, though there was a hint of wonder in his eyes. "Maybe," he said. "Your brother always did have a way of seeing things others missed." "Half-brother," Lily corrected with a playful grin. "Doesn't matter," Richard replied, ruffling her hair affectionately. "You're family. Both of you are." As autumn gave way to winter, Ethan's Haven became a beacon of hope for countless young people. Teens who had once been invisible to society were now finding their voices, discovering talents they never knew they had, and dreaming of futures they once thought impossible. Lily took on a leadership role within the foundation, mentoring newcomers and helping them navigate the challenges of rebuilding their lives. Her presence was a reminder that change was possible, that even those who had been broken could heal and grow. Richard watched her blossom with pride, but he also noticed the toll it sometimes took on her. There were nights when she stayed up, late, unable to sleep, haunted by memories she couldn't escape. On those occasions, Richard would knock gently on her bedroom door and sit with her until she drifted off. He didn't offer advice or try to fix anything, He simply stayed, letting her know she wasn't alone. One particularly cold evening, as snowflakes danced outside the window, Lily confided in him about a recurring dream she'd been having. "I see Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's standing under that bridge where we met, smiling at me. But every time I try to reach him, he disappears." Richard listened intently, his heart aching for her. "Do you think he's trying to tell you something?" he asked. "I think he's saying goodbye," Lily admitted, tears streaming down her face. "Not forever, but, like, it's okay to let go now, to move forward." Reaching out, Richard wiped away her tears. "You don't have to forget him to do that," he said gently. "He'll always be a part of you, just like he's a part of me. And together we'll make sure his legacy lives on." By spring, Ethan's Haven had become more than just a shelter or a program. It was a family. The teens who lived there formed bonds with one another, supporting and encouraging each other through thick and thin. Volunteers poured their hearts into teaching classes, leading workshops, and organizing events. Even donors who had initially contributed out of obligation found themselves deeply invested in the mission. For Richard, the foundation filled a void he hadn't realized existed. It gave him purpose beyond wealth and success, reminding him of the values Ethan had cherished most: compassion, empathy, and a desire to make the world better. And for Lily, it provided not only stability, but also a sense of belonging. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen and valued. Still, there were moments when the weight of everything threatened to overwhelm her. During one such moment, as she stood alone in the library surrounded by books Ethan had loved, Richard found her staring at the mural of the tree. "Are we doing enough?" she asked, her voice heavy with doubt. "Will this really change anything?" Richard joined her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It already has," he said. "Look around you, Lily. These kids, they're thriving because of you, because of Ethan, because of us. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with taking the first step. And we've done that." Lily nodded slowly, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Yeah," she murmured. "We've come a long way." As they stood there together, gazing at the mural that symbolized their journey, Richard felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had started this path grieving the loss of his son, but along the way he had gained so much more: a daughter, a renewed sense of purpose, and a future filled with hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together, as a family. The months rolled on and Ethan's Haven continued to flourish. The foundation had become a cornerstone of the community, a place where broken lives were mended and forgotten dreams were reignited. Every day brought new stories of hope: teens finding jobs, enrolling in school, or simply smiling again after years of hardship. For Richard, these victories felt like gifts, each one a reminder that Ethan's spirit was alive and well in the work they were doing. But despite the progress, there were still moments when Lily seemed distant, lost in thoughts she didn't share. Richard noticed it most during quiet evenings at home, when the house was silent except for the faint hum of the wind outside. She would sit by the window, staring out at the stars, her expression unreadable. He wanted to ask her what was troubling her, but he also knew better than to push too hard. Healing wasn't linear. It came in waves, and sometimes those waves carried people back to places they weren't ready to revisit. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset, Lily finally broke the silence. "Do you ever feel like we're not done yet?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Richard turned to look at her, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," she admitted, fiddling with the hem of her sweater. "It's just, I keep thinking about Mom, about how she struggled so much and never got the help she needed. And then I think about all the other moms out there, parents who are trying their best but still failing because the system doesn't support them. What if we could do more? Not just for kids like me, but for families too." Her words struck a chord deep within Richard. He had always thought of Ethan's Haven as a sanctuary for teens, a place to give them a fresh start. But Lily was right. There was a bigger picture, one that included the parents and guardians whose struggles often went unnoticed. It was a daunting idea, expanding the Foundation's mission to include family support programs, but it was also undeniably necessary. "You're incredible, you know that?" Richard said, his voice filled with admiration. "Most people wouldn't even think about something like this. They'd be happy with what we've already accomplished." Lily shrugged, though a faint blush colored her cheeks. "I'm just saying what Ethan would have said. He always saw the bigger picture." "That he did," Richard agreed, nodding, slowly. "All right, let's do it. Let's figure out how to expand the Foundation. Together." Over the next several weeks, Richard and Lily worked tirelessly to develop a plan for the new initiative. They consulted with experts in family counseling, addiction recovery, and social services, ensuring that every aspect of the program was thoughtful and comprehensive. The goal was simple: to provide struggling families with the tools and resources they needed to stay together and thrive. From parenting workshops to financial literacy classes, the initiative aimed to address the root causes of homelessness and instability. As word spread about the expansion, the community rallied behind them once again. Donations poured in, volunteers signed up in droves, and local businesses offered partnerships to support the cause. By summer, the first phase of the program was underway, with pilot sessions being held at a nearby community center. Families began attending, tentatively at first, but soon they were opening up, sharing their stories and finding strength in the connections they formed. Lily threw herself into the project, leading workshops and mentoring participants. She had a natural ability to connect with people, to make them feel seen and heard without judgment. Watching her in action, Richard couldn't help but marvel at how far she had come. Gone was the guarded, mistrustful girl he had met at the cemetery. In her place was a confident young woman who inspired everyone around her, including him. On a warm July evening, Ethan's Haven hosted its first annual gala to celebrate the success of the expanded program. The event was held outdoors under a canopy of twinkling lights, with tables adorned with flowers and candles. Guests mingled freely, laughing and chatting as soft music played in the background. At the center of it all stood Richard and Lily, side by side, welcoming everyone who had contributed to their journey. When it was time for speeches, Richard stepped up to the microphone, his heart swelling with pride. "Tonight, we honor two extraordinary individuals," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "My son, Ethan, whose compassion and vision inspired us to create this foundation, and my daughter, Lily, whose courage and determination have brought us to where we are today." The crowd erupted into applause as Lily joined him on stage, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I didn't do anything special," she protested softly, leaning toward him. "This is all thanks to Ethan, and to you." "You're wrong," Richard replied, squeezing her hand. "Without you, none of this would have happened." Taking a deep breath, Lily addressed the audience. "When I first came to Richard, I didn't think I deserved a second chance. I thought I was too broken, too lost to ever find my way. But Ethan believed in me before I believed in myself. And now, through this foundation, we're proving that everyone deserves a chance to rewrite their story. Not just kids like me, but families too. So thank you for believing in us, for supporting us, and for helping us turn Ethan's dream into reality." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of her words settling over everyone. Then, as if on cue, a cheer rose from the crowd, echoing into the night sky. Tears streamed down Lily's face as she hugged Richard tightly, overwhelmed by the love and gratitude surrounding them. In the months that followed, Ethan's Haven became a national model for addressing homelessness and family instability. News outlets featured stories about the foundation, highlighting its innovative approach and measurable impact. Politicians praised it as an example of private sector philanthropy done right. But for Richard and Lily, the real reward wasn't fame or recognition. It was the knowledge that they were making a difference, one life at a time. As autumn returned, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson, Richard found himself reflecting on how much had changed since that fateful day at the cemetery. He had started the year grieving the loss of his son, convinced that nothing could fill the void left behind. Yet here he was, standing beside his daughter, building a legacy that honored Ethan in ways he never imagined possible. One crisp morning, as they walked through the grounds of Ethan's haven, Lily stopped suddenly and pointed to the mural of the tree. Beneath the names of Ethan and Lily, someone had added another name: Richard. It was written in bold letters surrounded by leaves that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. "Did you see this?" Lily asked, her eyes shining with mischief. "Richard," chuckled, shaking his head. "Who added that?" "No idea," Lily teased, grinning. "But whoever it was, they got it right. You're part of this tree too, Dad. Always have been." For the first time in years, Richard felt truly whole. He had lost his son, but in doing so, he had found his daughter, and in her, he had rediscovered himself. Together they had created something beautiful, something eternal. And as long as Ethan's haven stood, Ethan's memory would live on, not just in the walls of the building, but in the hearts of everyone whose lives it touched. Hand in hand, father and daughter continued walking, their shadows stretching long across the grass. The future was uncertain, as it always was, but for the first time in a long time, neither of them was afraid. They had each other and they had hope, and sometimes that was enough.